Hello. This is Tales of Dread. In tonight's episode, we'll tell you some stories about vampires. Enjoy, and don't forget to hit the bell icon, like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. I am a park ranger. And, as you might guess, we sometimes find very strange things. People wouldn't believe some things, and I wouldn't have believed them either if I hadn't seen them with my own eyes. One of those things was when we found a bunch of dead animals with no obvious injuries. When we looked more closely, we found 2 tiny puncture wounds on their bodies, but they were in strange places. Sometimes the neck, but usually the leg, stomach, or anywhere else, and full and total loss of blood was always the cause of death. The bodies were dry husks. We saw doe and buck deer, moose, and even a black bear. We had no idea what in the world could have caused it. One of my co-workers came up with the idea of a vampire, but everyone laughed at him. We had no idea what in the world could have caused it. So, we set up a watch to try to figure out what was causing all of this damage. We set up cameras that would work at night, and some of us decided to stay out as well. We were more interested than scared at this point. And we were also curious about what was going on. We heard something around midnight. We all huddled together and waited to see what, if anything, would happen. Even in the evening, the woods aren't really quiet. So we just had to wait to find out what was behind the attacks. We looked at the monitor, which showed us what the infrared cameras were seeing. We didn't want to get too close to where we thought the action was happening because the predator would be able to smell us and probably not act well. The camera did catch something, but we don't know what it was. It was big, strong, and solid, and from what I could tell, it had dark skin or fur and was able to easily beat the deer. We haven't set up any complicated traps. As far as we knew, it wasn't even going to show up, and if it did, we didn't know where it would be. However, we had guns and a flare that we shot up into the sky as a warning, but it didn't react at all to the flare. So we fired a few more shots, more to scare it away than anything else. It didn't seem to like this, so it ran away. There were 3 of us watching this. 2 of us had played this game before, but the 3rd person was new. The other person and I were happy to just watch. We didn't want to go after this thing when we probably weren't ready to protect ourselves. Whatever it was easily able to kill and drain the blood from large animals. If it could kill a full-grown moose, why not someone? But the new guy must have thought he was a hero because he ran toward the beast. Thankfully, whatever it was long gone. I wouldn't have taken any chances on who would win, even if I had a gun. What do you know? It never came back. We'll never know if it knew it had been seen or not, or if it sent us there. But there was never another death that no one could explain. There were no more random puncture wounds, and no more blood was drained. It will be a puzzle we can never solve. My parents met in high school and were in love. At the time, they lived in Arizona. They would sometimes go horseback riding together in the middle of the desert. Eventually, they bought a ranch, but before that, they had a really bad and scary experience. After they got married, they decided to go out into the desert for a few days and stay in a tent. They each made a horse and brought a tent and food. They had done things like this before, so they knew how to stay safe, where to tie up the horses where there was shade and water, etc. At some point during the night, a terrible thing happened that they still remember and can't explain to this day. You see, when they woke up the next morning, one of the horses was dead. It was lying flat on the ground, with no wounds that could be seen. The other horse was just standing next to it as if it didn't see or care. It was very strange, because horses are usually very sensitive. My mom and dad both sleep very lightly. When my dad snores too loudly, my mom often ends up on the couch. There was no way they could sleep while one of the horses was being attacked. To say the least, they were upset. It was my mom's horse and neck of a horse. She saw two tiny holes that were barely visible, but she knew they were there now that she could see them. The holes were deep, not just on the surface. It looked like something had drilled into the horse or grabbed it, and there were a few drops of blood. My mom wouldn't give up her old friend. So, my dad rode his horse home and then drove his truck and trailer to pick up my mom and hers. They asked one of their friends who was some kind of medical examiner to find out what could have caused the strange wound and way of death. At this point, they thought that the horse had been bitten by a poisonous snake and had a heart attack, even though none of the usual signs were there, like vomiting or frothing around the mouth. Well, it wasn't that when their friend did the autopsy, he was so confused by what he found that he had to call in another co-worker. He asked his parents, "Are you sure there wasn't any blood at the scene?" And they don't answer. Not a drop. It would have been easy to tell because when the guy opened up the horse, the inside was totally dry. There wasn't a single drop of blood left, as if all of it had leaked out. When they looked at the wound on the neck, they saw that it was a clean hole. Very well done. The only thing that could have killed the horse was if something had gotten a hold of it without making a sound or making a fuss and drained it of all its blood while it was still alive. The second horse just stood there and watched, not getting scared or making a sound. If not, one of my parents would have gotten up. People started locking up their animals at night and keeping a closer eye on them after reading this story in the local paper. Some people even put shotguns in their barns to protect them. At the same time, some people put up crosses in their yards or burned sage. Rumors were going around, and one name kept coming up over and over. My parents said they didn't pay much attention to the chupacabra, but from what I've read, it seems to be the mythical beast that feeds on blood. It usually eats goats, but who knows if even cryptids won't take a free meal if they happen to be in the area. I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other, but it was the right place at the right time. What else could have caused those kinds of injuries and death without leaving any sign? The other night, I was out walking with my dog and we were getting ready to go home after a long walk. I had a very strange and scary experience. I was getting tired, and my dog was starting to lag behind me. I couldn't stop thinking about putting my head on my pillow. We live in a pretty rural area, and there is a lot of space between the houses. Several of my neighbors also have animals, mostly chickens, pigs, and other animals like that. When I walked by my next door neighbor, who has 3 big pigs, I heard them screaming and squealing. My dog started to bark like crazy and try to get off his leash. Mr. Jones in that house is old and hard of hearing, so even if a coyote or something else was attacking his precious pigs, he would probably sleep right through it. He cared about those pigs more than anyone who pulled on the leash. I went into the yard because I wanted to be a good neighbor and see how his pigs were doing. I thought he wouldn't mind if I was on his land, but I wasn't sure. I was just trying to help, but I didn't want to scare the pigs anymore, so I tied the dog to a post and went slowly over to the pen. I'm not sure what I was expecting to see, to be honest. Since it was around 1 a.m., it was pretty dark. Listen, I work swing shifts, so my schedule is all over the place. When I can, I try to work out and go for walks. But Mr. Jones keeps a porch light on, which lit up the pen just enough for me to get a general idea of what was going on. Something was going on with them in there. I'm not stupid. When I took my dog for a walk, I didn't carry any kind of weapon. I slowly moved away, and took the dog's leash off. I didn't care anymore if I scared the pigs. I hoped that this big dog would scare away whatever was in there. I didn't know what it was for sure. It kind of looked like a coyote in size and shape, but it didn't look right. I told myself that it was just a scare. I felt scared because the pig pen was in the dark. Well, my dog jumped in and attacked whatever it was. About a minute later, it let out a yelp that almost stopped my heart. The thing, which was not a coyote, jumped over the pen's fence and ran on two legs toward the woods at the back of his property. I didn't get a great look at it. My dog was lying on the side of the pen, whimpering and dying. Blood was coming out of his neck. I went to see how the pigs were doing. All three of them were dead, and it looked like they had just fallen over and died. I put my sweater around my dog's neck and knocked on Mr. Jones's door. I didn't want to stay. I wanted to go home and check on my dog, but I had to tell him what had happened the next morning. I went back to see him, and luckily, my dog's injury was only on the surface. After a quick trip to the vet, he was all better. Since I told the vet about the attack, they were a little confused about that animal. How could the injury have happened? As he said, the wound was very specific. There are 2 dots. Mr. Jones, on the other hand, was very sad. The vet called the sheriff, and when the sheriff came to see him and look at the pigs, it was said that he was just as confused as the vet. In the end, they asked the same animal doctor, which is why I said it was a small town in the country. The only damage he could find was 2 small holes in each of their necks. Blood loss, nothing had any blood left in it. That night, what did I see? Was this a person putting a hole in the neck? Was this some kind of wild dog that could walk on its hind legs? But what in the world is sucking the blood out of these animals? Is it true that there are vampires, or are there animals that can turn into vampires? Please explain this to me. I just want to figure out what's going on, but I can't. So, before I tell you this story, I have to say that I was drinking when it happened. But we're going to talk with my local friends after a few beers. I didn't get drunk. Just a nice warm buzz. The top. To be truthful, it took place a few years ago. Before I go on, I want to say that I have never met a drinker or known anyone who saw things after a few beers. I think it's important for people to know that when I tell the story, people say, yeah, but you drank, or yeah, but you were drunk, but that amount of alcohol doesn't cause hallucinations. Not in this way. As I said, I've been at the bar, where we've been talking and having fun. When it was time to close, we all went our separate ways. It took me about half an hour to walk home, which I never cared about. The fresh air always made me feel better and refreshed. I've walked that Route 100 many times, both during the day and at night. At the time, it was in November, right before Thanksgiving. I remember that it was very dark and cold, and that I was walking pretty fast. Even though it was about 11:30 p.m., I live in a small town with a lot of traffic, so there were streetlights and cars going by. So not early, but also not very early in the morning. About halfway through my walk, there is also a tunnel under one of the main roads. There might be a homeless camp nearby, I'm not sure, but I do know that sometimes you see homeless people. They never bother me, and I feel bad for them, but they usually bring down a lot of bad things like drugs, trash, drug deals, gangs, etc. Put your head down, put your hands in your pockets, breathe through your mouth, and get out of there as soon as you can. The road above it is pretty big, and the path is quite long. Several of the lights in there always seem to be broken or flickering, So even in the middle of the day it can be a little spooky. When I was walking through right then, less than half of the lights seemed to be on, and the ones that were going on and off like some lame laser show. I was less than halfway in when all the lights went out at the same time for just a second or two. I stopped still as the lights started to flicker again at the other end of the pass, which was where I needed to go to get out, and standing there was the scariest thing I've ever seen. At first, I thought it was a person because what else would be standing there tall and upright on two legs? Yes, I've already said it was November and night, but the air went from warm to freezing cold. I could feel in my gut that something was really off about this person, but I had to keep going because the only way to get home was to pass him or them. The closer I got, the weirder I felt, and my whole body was telling me to run away. I wasn't drunk, but I think the alcohol in my system made me feel that way. Not for nothing is it called Dutch courage. Just as I got close enough to see this blurry and shadowy part, the end light above him flashed, and I could see what else was in the underpass with me. He did look like a person so far. He looked like a person. I know that sounds strange, but hear me out. The first thing I noticed about him was that he was naked and had skin that was almost white, pale, and see-through. He also had no hair, was very thin, and almost looked sick, like a Holocaust survivor who was about to die, with bones sticking out from under their skin. They looked like they were starving. If seeing a pale, naked man in a tunnel in the middle of the night wasn't bad enough, what I'm about to tell you will show you why this was so bad. His face looked wrong. He or she or whatever it was had tiny black eyes, almost no nose, and a wide, gaping mouth with what looked like sharp little shark teeth and two overly large canines that stuck out. That's right, his teeth looked like fangs, and his face was covered in dried blood, as if some of it was coming out of his mouth. I could tell you I just stood there and stared at him, but I'm not sure if I did. I don't know if I should call this thing a he or not. Then, as I started to say some kind of prayer, I thought it was going to kill me, but it just kind of flew away. I know it sounds strange, but it really did look like it went straight up into the air and then disappeared, like in a movie or something. I ran out of there as fast as I could and ran all the way home as if my life depended on it. Exactly what was that? I keep coming up with different ideas. I know that some drugs can really mess you up, but I don't think they can make you fly. As I already said, it happened a few years ago. I never went near that underpass again, I can tell you that. If I met my friends I'd just get a taxi or an Uber home. Not even bother walking, not even in the daylight if I could help it. I've looked in newspapers, online, articles, and just about anything else, but I haven't found anyone who has seen anything like this. Or maybe they have, but like me, they're afraid to talk about it for fear of being laughed at or called a liar. In any case, I'm sure I'll never forget that night or what I saw. I really don't want to see it again. I wouldn't say that I explore cities. I would just call myself someone whose curiosity gets the best of him when he sees places that look like they have been abandoned for a long time. I don't take all of the photos or make all of the videos or run the YouTube channel. I just see a dark hole, and some part of me says that I can't move forward in life until I find out what's in that hole. People don't seem to notice the empty, dark places around them as they go about their daily lives. It seems like they just don't notice that there's no empty space around them. When in fact, these places are close enough that they can breathe on them at any time. Every day, I take the subway to work. Near me, almost everyone has their head down in a book or is glued to their phone. But I have a way of looking around because I know there must be a part of the subway that is no longer used, and is just waiting to be explored. I've been building up the courage to go to one of these places for months. I noticed it after about 2 or 3 weeks of taking the subway to this new job. You'd miss it if you closed your eyes. I didn't know if it was a hole in the wall or a door in the wall that hadn't been fixed. It was in a part of the tunnel that wasn't supposed to be accessible to people on foot. I knew this because there was a big flashing red arrow there. I finally chose a day to go check it out. I packed a bag and made sure I had a couple of working lights. I looked up the train schedule so I wouldn't get stuck, and then I went. It took me longer than I thought to get to the hole in the wall. When I was in the subway car, I probably misjudged how fast I was going. Oddly enough, the rush of adrenaline I felt when I wasn't sure if I was going to make it in time without getting run over was fun. But now that I think about it, I wouldn't want to do it again. I'm glad to say that I got where I was going without any problems. The only thing that happened was that my heartbeat sped up, because I was so excited. There was a door, but it looked like it had been taken off its hinges at some point and put back in place half-heartedly. I didn't need nearly as many tools as I had thought. The door put up as much of a fight as a dead body when I tried to open it. When I turned my flashlight around for the first time, I found myself in what looked like an office. The desks and swivel chairs were covered in dust, but nothing smelled strange except for the musty smell and stillness of age. The furniture looked a little bit old. So, I told myself to look for a calendar that might have been left behind. I was hooked. It was my place, and I was going to find out what was hidden there. All of the other rooms were the same. There didn't seem to be any places for guests to stay, like lounges or places where people could read magazines. I found at least 11 rooms, and I started to worry that I was going to get lost. What I had found turned out to be a pretty big deal. Even though there were so many rooms, no papers or calendars were left behind, which was both inspiring and disappointing. I got the impression that they were trying to hide something important, so I went into one of the rooms with a door strong enough to protect a freezer. The smell started then. I got it. There was something rotting down there. And recently, I tried to tell myself it was just a rat or something, but when I turned on my flashlight, I saw the bodies of foxes, squirrels, raccoons, feral dogs, cats, and even rats stacked up in neat piles. I think I saw something big enough to be a dog or a coyote. My senses were trying to tell me something about the bodies. I had to look at it for a while before I could figure it out. Each carcass had to have holes in it that were evenly spaced. The bodies, which had been there for a while, looked like they had been well taken care of, as if they had been embalmed, which would mean that their blood had been drained out. At that moment, I felt my throat tighten, my senses heightened, and my mind almost made me see and hear things where there were none. I started to think I could hear something that matched the sound of my steps. Before, there hadn't been an echo. Then there was the time I found the pile of animals that were only partly mummified. When I shined my light where I thought the mimic was, there was nothing there. I decided to walk out there and not look back or stop for anything. That's when something behind me lunged and missed. When I shined my flashlight on it, I thought I saw a skinny, naked child. It was as thin as the bodies buried in mass graves during World War II. Then it turned and looked at me. It looked like a dog from the outside, but it was pink and bald. Its mouth was open, showing 2 long canine teeth, a long tongue, and the fact that it was clearly used to lapping. I realized I had brought nothing with me to protect myself, so I tried to keep my light on it and back out of the empty rooms. It kept looking at me with a scared face, but it got closer to me every time I moved away. I had no fear of myself at all. It made soft hisses, then clicks that were hard to hear. Just like I thought, I might have gotten lost because I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. I found the hole that led back to the subway. It was an afterthought to check the time. My only worry was how to get out of the subway. It came right up to the door, but when it saw the light, it moved away. I got back to the road without getting hit by a car or bitten. That is likely one of the scariest stories I can tell you about exploring cities. Since I was 16, I've been single. I'm 37. I can't just go around telling people my story because it's about an unsolved case in this day and age. Any publicity can be turned around and used against someone in some way. I just need to get something off my chest that I've been carrying around for a long time, even if no one knows who I am. I'm hoping that telling you guys and, by extension, your listeners will help me get over this. When I was 15, I fell in love. I think everyone knows how hot love between teenagers can be. It might be simple, but it's still very powerful. We both lived in a small township in the middle of nowhere in Michigan. It was one of those places with a big forest and 6 houses close enough to each other that someone decided it was a town. We had lived next door to each other our whole lives, but we didn't know it until middle school. We both couldn't stop looking at each other when we first met. We both spent a lot of time outside. So it was only a matter of time before we found ways to hang out together outside of school without anyone knowing. Even though I grew up close to those woods, there were still parts of them that scared me. But this girl wasn't afraid of anything. She drove right into thorns, poison ivy, and things that looked like coyotes slept in them, but she didn't get hurt or anything. I tried to be a good old country boy to win her over. Then I found out that she was tougher and more used to being outside than I was. It was cute and embarrassing at the same time. I told her that when we were together, we needed a place where no one would ever bother us. So, she took my hand and led me into a part of the woods where it felt like the outside world was a million miles away, almost like it was in a different world. But it was close enough to have the broken down remains of an old corn crib. She had just enough stuff there for us to feel at home. From the outside, it looked like a building that had been shut down, but inside it was nice enough. In case it got dark, we had an oil lantern with us. There were rough spots, some worse than others, as there are in all teen relationships. But we got through most of them, except for one, and that one was the hardest for me. Only when she was with me did I have the courage to go to our favorite place. I could not do it on my own. I thought there were things in the bushes and shadows that were just waiting for me to be alone. She went in and out of there by herself all the time, but I just couldn't do it. Our parents were starting to get suspicious, and she wouldn't let me explain my side in as much detail as I thought was necessary because she thought I was interested in someone else. So, we got into a big fight and then went our separate ways. The next day, and the day after that, she didn't go to school. When the weekend came, I went to her house to look around. I saw her parents and her little brother, but I didn't see her. I was wondering if she was setting up a tent in our favorite place. I'm embarrassed to say that I was too scared to walk out there alone. I wanted to, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was watching me in those woods, the way I watched her house. Saturday and Sunday came and went, and she was still gone. Of course, by that time, the alarm had already gone off that a teenager couldn't be found. I could no longer sneak around her house without getting caught. And by Tuesday, the whole thing was in the news. I got up the courage to go to our special place and see if anything had happened to her. I found her there, but she was already dead. I had hoped she was just sleeping, but no one sleeps with their eyes that wide open. A notepad was close by. She was in the middle of writing me a letter when something came up. It was a letter to me, but it only took up half of the page and ended in the middle of a sentence. There were no bumps on her body, just 2 clean holes in her neck. Her skin was so pale that it was even grey. I called the police when I got home and told them what I had found. That was the day I stopped believing in people. I never thought that so many people would want me to be the bad guy. Everyone in town, not just her parents. The rest of the people in the viewing area were sure that I had killed her. I must have done it out of jealousy when I saw her writing a note while I was making my case about the strange injuries on her neck. People acted like I was talking in Latin or something. It didn't make them angry at all and made them unable to hear anything that wasn't an admission of guilt. Just enough detectives in Legal Eagles could figure out that I wasn't the one who killed her, so I was ruled out as the murderer. However, the judge's decision wasn't good enough for everyone else. I was almost completely left out of the group. I pretty much live by myself now. Since I found out I could afford to live on my own, I've wanted to. People are like dogs in that they don't know what to do. Yes. I went back to our favorite place. Over the years, I've done this a lot of times. A few times, I did it so that whatever or whoever killed her would leave my body for the community. Then I started to think that I should kill whatever killed her and give it to the police or maybe the Smithsonian, depending on what I find. I've almost caught it a couple of times, but it's not a person. I don't think it is smart enough to realize what it has done to my life and mental health. The fact that I'm going to kill it doesn't change. That's what makes me want to live right now. When I haven't been drinking long enough to get myself together and go out there, I'm killing this thing. I'm trying to find out more about it. I'll get what I want in the end, but I don't know what I'll do after that. This was back when people could still smoke in bars. I was at my favorite place to get a beer, where the smoke was so thick you could drive a nail through it. When my younger brother started calling me on my phone, I was just starting to feel really good. I thought he was back on meth because of how quickly he talked, but it turned out he was just really excited about something. I could only figure out that I needed to get to his place right away. I was found out. I didn't have the guts to tell him I went drinking without him. I can't think of anything more important that would make me not want to go. So I gave it my money and left. As the sun went down, the trees and telephone lines looked like black cutouts. When I pulled into his driveway, he was waiting for me outside, running in circles like a dog that had to go to the bathroom really badly. I asked him what was so important that I had to drop what I was doing and run to him right then. He waved at me and told me to follow him, but he didn't even wait to make sure I did. He grabbed an electric lantern and led me outside to a small barn where he kept a small number of goats as pets. The goats were lying down and watching us. I couldn't help but notice how nervous they looked. My brother led me to some boxes where a goat was stretched out. I could hear a few flies buzzing around, and I could smell death. My brother looked at me as if he wanted to see what I would do. I wasn't interested in dead animals, and the eager look in my brother's eyes was starting to creep me out. I asked him why he was doing this. He told me to take a close look, but I didn't want to because it was dead and had been for so long that it smelled. He pointed to the neck of the animal and held the lantern close. The goats were dark, and I could see two evenly spaced holes, which looked like something a big snake would do. I looked at my brother, who still looked like a crazy person getting ready to rob a bank. I asked him if he had found something like a giant anaconda. He shook his head and led me to a different set of crates with a cage on top. My eyes weren't fully adjusted yet, so I thought I saw a monkey behind those bars. However, this monkey had pale pink skin with the same texture as the leather on my steering wheel, and its coppery, orange-colored eyes were wide open. And two long canine teeth that looked like hooks coming out of the creature's lips. Then I saw those teeth, and I knew what was going on. I was waiting for a sign that this whole thing was a lie. But no, it blinked. It jerked. It got skin on its shoulders and legs as the urge to run overcame it, but it couldn't. He must have been pleased with the way I looked at him. He tried to tell me it was a funny-sounding animal, like a cooby with a lot of fat. I'm not sure if he said he'd lost a few goats to it, and I didn't know what to think of it until then. So he put a chicken in a cage and waited. Then, all of a sudden, he bagged it and started dancing like a fool, which was something he only did when he was drunk. I didn't find out until much later that he had been using meth again, and starting to use other drugs. He thought that if he sold this thing to the right people, he would make enough money to be able to live that way. Well, when you dance around like that close to a cage, you tend to knock it over. Cages that get knocked over have a good chance of opening, and things that were inside them usually fall out. If you catch my drift, my brother knocked over the cage and I watched it all happen as if in slow motion. The thing seemed surprised that I had a chance to get away, but I wasn't going to touch it, and since my brother's coordination was off, it got away and my brother did something wrong and had to pay for it. Since he tested positive for all the garbage in the system, no one believed a word he said, and I didn't see anything like that little green gremlin sense. There was nothing dramatic. You will be the only one to ever hear me say that. Which is weird. I've been keeping this story to myself, and I know that the way I'm writing it makes me sound like a storyteller, but it's my own story. I've never seen anyone or anything look at me like that before. It reminded me of a failed science experiment, like something you'd hear about in a sci-fi movie or something they do when they combine genes to make a new being. So, that's no longer the case. I hope